wind that December night was a starving wolf. It didn't just blow, it gnawed. It gnawed at the wood of the abandoned wagon, and it gnawed at the spirit of a girl named Petal. She was only 5 years old. Her hair, the color of soft earth, was matted with frost. If you had looked into her eyes in that freezing dark, you would have seen something strange. One eye as pale as a summer sky, the other a deep, ancient amber. But that night, both were dimming. The thread of her life was frayed, ready to snap. Her numb fingers brushed against something in the debris. A ball of yarn. It felt brittle, gray, and ordinary. But as she wrapped it around her shivering frame, the air changed. The wind went silent. A voice spoke. It wasn't a human voice. It was the sound of a million silk threads rustling in a loom. It was the weaver of fate. The pattern has a flaw, the voice whispered. Your thread has snapped, little one. Shall I mend the rupture? I offer you the spool. You shall mend the snags I show you. You shall create where others destroy. Petal didn't understand the words. She only understood the need to live. She clutched the yarn and nodded. By the first light of dawn, Petal's hands were moving. She didn't know how she knew the stitches, but the yarn obeyed her. It flowed like water. In minutes, a shape took form, a small, mottled bear no bigger than a kitten. With a soft, magical pop, he was real. She named him Mr. Fluffs. He was soft and fuzzy, and exactly what a lonely girl needed. Mr. Fluffs, she breathed, her amber eye sparking with new light. Keep me warm. The little bear didn't glow with fire, but as he curled against her chest, the cold retreated. He was a correction in the world's design. He was her first friend, her first miracle, and her first step into a very long, very strange story. Hunger isn't just a feeling when you're 5 years old. It's a pull. It's a hook in your center, tugging you toward the smell of things you can't have. For days, Petal stayed by the abandoned wagon, survived on melted snow and the fading memory of her mother's voice. But the weaver's gift, the silver-gray thread, felt expectant. It didn't want her to fade. It wanted her to move. She saw the smoke-first thin ribbons rising over the tree line, promising hearts and ovens. Petal stood up, her legs shaking like a newborn fawn's. She tucked Mr. Fluffs deep into a ragged coat, leaving only his knotted ears peeking out. We have to go, Mr. Fluffs, she whispered. The town is bred. Maybe they have a corner for us. She wandered toward the gates of Oak Haven to Petal. The town looked like a kingdom of giants. The smell of fresh rye and roasting meat hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't looking for trouble. She was a shadow in the periphery, scavenging in the gutters for a dropped apple core. But the town was too bright, and Petal was too strange. People began to look, not with kindness, but with that narrow-eyed suspicion. Beneath her coat, Mr. Fluff shifted, a tiny knitted movement that caught the eye of a passing merchant. "It's alive!" he barked. An old woman's scream followed. "An abomination! Black magic in a child's hands! Witch!" The word was a stone. They threw it until it bruised her spirit. Petal ran, the silver gray thread from her hip whipped out, taut as a bowstring, tripping the first man who reached for her. She ran until her breath burned like jagged glass, her soft hair tangled with the sweat of terror. She found her sanctuary in the rot, in the shadows of an old stone temple, huddled among broken flower pots and discarded reeds. It was quiet here, the kind of quiet that feels like the world has forgotten you. She pulled Mr. Fluff's out, her mismatched eyes, one sky blue, one dark amber, searching for a way to make the world stop looking. Mr. Fluff performed a small, decisive action. He nudged a discarded piece of a broken, dirty basket and settled into the trash. Trying to disappear, Petal understood. She reached for the silver gray thread. Her small, clumsy hands began to weave a patch of dull brown and gray directly onto his back. She wasn't just knitting yarn. She was knitting a secret. "Be still," she whispered, her voice a tiny thread of hope. "Be unimportant. Just be nothing." With the final stitch, a veil dropped. Mr. Fluff's was still there, but he was gone. He looked like a pile of rags. He was safe because he was forgettable. Petal let out a sob she'd been holding since the gates. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched the dull, camouflaged yarn. The second her skin met his, the gray fog evaporated. Mr. Fluff's became himself again, soft, fuzzy, and alive. He didn't hesitate. He pushed his yarn head against her side, a warm, comforting weight that chased away the cold and the fear. In the dark of the temple, the threaded girl and her bear were alone. But for the first time, they were hidden. 3 days in the silence of the temple. 3 days is long enough for the stomach to forget hope and remember only the ache. Petal sat in the dust, her sky blue and amber eyes tracking the way the moonlight crawled across the cracked floor. Beside her, Mr. Fluff's made a sound, a soft, dry rasp of yarn on yarn. It was the echo of her hunger. The weaver didn't speak in words this time. It was a pressure in her palms, a directive written in the marrow of her bones: acquire, preserve, return. She couldn't go back to the streets. The witch cries were still too fresh. She needed a shadow that could walk where she couldn't. Petal pulled the silver gray thread, but she didn't knit a friend this time. She knit a tool. Her fingers moved with a frantic, focused grace, weaving a tiny, twitching shape, a mouse. Not a soft toy, but a gray, dirty-looking scout with eyes made of tight, hard knots. "You are just a shadow," she breathed, her voice cracking from disuse. "Find the softest thing in the baker's bin. Bring it back to the dark." The yarn mouse didn't pop. It hissed into existence. It darted into the night, a silent blur of movement. Petal waited. Every minute was a stitch in time she couldn't unmake. When it returned, it wasn't dragging glory. It was dragging a dry, leathery crust of rye. But to Petal, it was a feast. The mouse dropped the bread at her feet and looked up at her. For one heartbeat, it seemed to have a spark of its own. Then the pact claimed its due. With a sickening, soft sound, the mouse didn't die. It simply ceased to be. It unraveled. The legs, the tail, the ears, all of it collapsed into a pile of limp, gray thread. Petal's heart sank as she watched the life leave the yarn. This was the ritual. The weaver gives, but the weaver never loses a single inch of the spool. Petal gathered the loose thread into her leather pouch, feeling the exhausted magic hum against her skin. By morning, the pouch would be empty, the essence reclaimed by the main skein. She bit into the dry bread, the taste of survival bitter and dusty. She was a master of life, but only the kind that ends in a pile of string. The temple was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage. The bread was gone, the shadows were thinning, and the silver-gray thread at Petal's hip began to hum, not with warmth, but with a restless, pulling vibration. The weaver was done letting her hide. "The first snag, little one," the voice whispered, vibrating in the marrow of Petal's teeth. "The pattern is fraying at the crossroads of ash. Go mend what is broken, or be unraveled yourself." Petal looked at Mr. Fluffs. He was sitting by a pile of frozen moss, his button nose twitching. She didn't want to go. The world outside was full of witch cries and heavy boots. But the thread pulled, it tugged at her waist like a hook in a fish, steering her toward the temple's broken archway. "We need to see the way," Petal whispered to the bear. She pulled a length of the shimmering yarn, her fingers flying in a blur of panicked instinct. She didn't knit a mouse for the floor or a bear for her heart. She knit a silver moth. It was delicate, its wings a gossamer mesh of gray silk. As it took flight, it didn't flap. It drifted on the magical currents only Petal could see. It glowed with a faint, pale light, the color of her own sky blue eye. "Follow the light, Mr. Fluffs," she commanded, her voice steadying. She stepped out of the temple and into the moonlit woods. The road ahead was a ribbon of uncertainty, winding toward the crossroads of ash. For the first time, Petal wasn't running from something. She was being pulled toward a destiny she couldn't outrun. Behind her, the ruins faded into the mist. Ahead, the silver moth bobbed in the dark, a tiny, fragile guide in a world that wanted to snap her thread in two. The crossroads of ash wasn't just a graveyard of memories. It was a holding pen for the forgotten. The silver moth, Petal's tiny guide, didn't flutter over a magical snag in the air. Instead, it circled a figure slumped against the charred oak tree. It wasn't a monster. It was an old woman. Her skin was the color of dust and her eyes were fixed on the void. But as Petal got closer, she saw the truth. The woman wasn't just old. She was unraveling. A dozen loose, gray threads were spilling from her frayed coat, pooling in the ash like spilled blood. This was someone who had followed the weaver before. Someone who had given the goddess her thread, used the spool, and been discarded when she became worn. She was the flaw in the design. It never ends, little warlock, the woman whispered, not moving her gaze. The spool is endless, but the weaver's patience is not. When you are worn, she takes the thread back every single inch. With those words, the loose gray thread snapped taut. The woman let out a strangled gasp as the unseen force began to pull her apart, reclaiming the essence that made her real. The entire crossroads began to shudder as the woman's life fabric was violently pulled toward the void. Mend the tear. The weaver's voice rasped in Petal's marrow. Bind the flaw to the pattern, preserve the design. Hold the edges, Mr. Fluffs, Petal commanded. She pulled the bone needle from her belt and the long shimmering strand of silver gray thread from her pouch. She wasn't performing surgery on the world. She was knitting a human soul back together. Back and forth, over and under, Petal's fingers bled as she stitched the loose, frantic gray threads back onto the woman's unraveling frame. The silver yarn turned black when it touched the suffering, but Petal didn't stop until the gray was anchored, reinforced by the silver structure she had built. The shuddering in the world stopped. The old woman blinked, her eyes clearing for the first time in days. Against all logic, in the heart of the ash, a single pale green moss sprig sprouted from the charred root where the woman's gray yarn had been bound. Life had won, but it had required a patch. Petal collapsed into the ash. She had saved the worn follower, but she had used nearly all the silver thread from the spool. She had defied the weaver's implication of discard and reuse by choosing to fix and preserve. She had won the battle, but she knew the weaver was watching. The threaded girl and her bear were no longer just scavengers. They were a complication in the design. Easy now, Barnaby. Stop fluttering your yarn wings. You'll catch an ember, and we'll have to patch your left primary again. And Pip, move back from the heat. You know how the weaver's thread shrinks when it gets too dry. I see those button eyes staring at me. I know what you're thinking. You're worried about little Petal, aren't you? Sitting there in the ash with her hands all bloody and her spool running low. It's a lot for a 5-year-old to carry. The weight of a soul that's coming apart at the seams. And you want to know about the old woman. Who is she, you ask? Is she a monster? Is she a ghost? She's a mirror, my darlings. A glimpse of what happens when the weaver decides a garment is no longer in fashion. She followed the path, she did the mending, and she grew tired. The weaver doesn't like tired things. She prefers them repurposed. You're wondering if Petal made the right choice to use the weaver's own silver to fix something the weaver wanted to reclaim. That's a dangerous game to play with a goddess. It's like trying to talk back to the needle while it's mid-stitch. But don't you fret your stuffing just yet. Petal has Mr. Fluffs, and Mr. Fluffs has a heart that glows brighter than this fire. There's a long road between the crossroads of ash and the end of the spool. Now, settle in, Pip. Tuck your paws in Barnaby, eyes on the flames. The night is long, and the next part of the pattern, well, that's where the colors start to bleed.